Hello YouTube, it's Rockin' Military Antiques here, and today I figured I'd do more of an informational video for newer collectors, things like that. This video is essentially going to be about how to tell when your M1 helmet was made, all the finer details about it that may impact what it's worth or just cool facts to know, and I'm also going to include liners in this video, but I'll get to those after the shells. So I'm going to start with World War II, work my way up to Korea, and then do Vietnam. I don't have an 80s shell, but to be completely honest, they're not worth a ton or very noteworthy anyways. I do have an 80s liner though, so I'll show that off to show what it kind of looks like. So I figure I'll start with the World War II ones and show you guys what it's all about, and we'll continue from there. So this is essentially the first type of M1 helmet. This is what's known as a front seam fixed bale World War II helmet, and I'll get into all the finer details of that. So on the outside, what you want to know is the texturing here is what's known as corking. World War II helmets were done with corking texturing to break up the reflection of the light, because if it was just painted smooth, then it would reflect a lot of light and draw a lot of attention. So helmets after this would use sanding as texturing, but I'll get to that after. So World War II helmets are textured with corking. Now, not a ton of corking helmets are left. Either they've just been worn down or they've been reissued as Vietnam helmets and therefore gotten this all filed down and replaced with Vietnam sanding paint and all that kind of stuff. But other things to notice are down here, the rim of the helmet. This is what's known as a front seam. Helmets at the beginning of World War II were made with front seams, and they transitioned to rear seams, which I'll get to. Another thing to note is the rim here, which you can see the paint's flaking off of it because it's made of a stainless steel. They would switch this material later in the war to the steel that the helmet is made of, the manganese steel, so it would not chip as much. It's pretty easy to tell the difference, even if you can't see through the paint. Because stainless steel rims, you'll see, the chips here and the very shiny material underneath. And the reason they switched it is because the paint didn't really stick, and it would cause this very obvious steel reflective surface to look at. Now inside, these are what's known as fixed bales. Typically helmets in posts online or listings or whatever are described by the location of the seam and the state of the bales. So the front seam right here means that the helmet seam is in the front. Rear seam would indicate that it was in the back. Fixed bales indicate this type of bale right here, where essentially the bales are just straight up attached to the helmet and the chin straps attached to the bales. Swivel bales were implemented because these fixed bales would keep, get knocked by something and just pop right off. They didn't attach to the helmet very well. Another thing to note with these is the World War II chin straps. World War II chin straps were sewn directly onto the bales. They would be, the early war ones are a light tan color, and the later war ones are a more OD green color, lighter green. And they would have this type of buckle right here, which kind of stays constant throughout, and this type of hook right here. The hook will change, but this is the World War II style hook. The earlier war ones were made with a sort of brass, and you'll sometimes see it coming through the paint, but not always. There's a lot of finer details to this helmet that just would be impossible to pack into a video. This is how you generally tell a helmet. Actually, no. While I'm down here, during World War II, there were two manufacturers of M1 helmet shells. There were McCord and Schluter. McCord is by far the more common manufacturer. They made a lot of helmets with heat stamps ranging from 1 to 1200, while Schluter's helmet shells are from around 0 to 600, around there. And the way you can tell them apart are by the markings on the rim and the heat stamp. I do have a Schluter for reference for you guys, but McCord, this shell happens to be McCord. The McCord stamps in the seam here are kind of oval shaped and wide, where they stamped the rim shut around the helmet, and the heat stamp is very hard to see on this, you can kind of see it reflecting in the light, will be a sequence of between 1 and 4 numbers and a letter. So this one is 78C, so that's 2 numbers and a letter, nothing else. Now they could go up to, I used to own a helmet that was like 1250 D, and they go all the way up. Obviously, the earlier the heat stamp, the more the helmet is generally worth, but that is just average information for you guys. This is the next type of helmet. This is what's known as a front seam swivel bail helmet. So the seam remains consistent with the other one, where it's got the seam right in the front and the stainless steel rim. But if I look inside, you can see that this is the swivel bail. This is essentially the solution to the bails snapping off. They will turn, and instead of, if you dropped your helmet, they would turn downwards like this instead of just completely breaking off. These are the later war style chin straps with the darker OD green. However, these have been fitted with Vietnam era hardware, so I won't use these for reference. But I don't have one currently. There are versions of this helmet where the seam was made with the manganese steel, so they kept the front seam but had manganese steel in sort of a transitional period where they first had the front seam with the stainless steel rim, then they switched to a front seam with a manganese rim, and then they switched to a rear seam with the manganese rim. So there are kind of like middleman helmets in there. I used to own one, but they're not especially valuable because of that. This one is also a McCord shell, and I believe, if the stamp doesn't show up very well, I have it written on this card here. I try to ID my helmets. So I couldn't make this stamp out. 2 of the items there are, I couldn't read them, but this is a 3-digit stamp, so getting up there. The rear seam ones are like at the very end of the 3-digit range into the 4-digit range. Not a lot of those made it overseas, however, they are still valuable because they were made during World War II. This is a late World War II shell, a rear seam swivel bail. So you can see on this one, the rim has changed from stainless to manganese steel, where, it doesn't chip off and show as much. In the back, you can see this helmet was made by McCord. So it has the little oval-shaped punches. And this is the late World War II straps. They are a dark OD green with the same hooks as you saw in the first helmet, and the buckle right there. This helmet, I believe the heat stamp is covered on this one, but yes, it's covered. But you can tell it's McCord even without the heat stamp because of that. Another thing I wanted to mention is this is a Vietnam reissue. So you can tell that because the other helmets had a darker green, but this one appears to have been painted a lighter green. There's another one I'll show right after this, but reissues are not, uncommon. There's probably the majority of the World War II helmets were reissued, so I'll show you one of those right now. This is a true reissued World War II helmet. You can see that the original coat of paint has been covered by this lighter green with the fine sanding texture on here. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that World War II shells in general have a higher dome than the later shells, like Korean War and Vietnam era shells. It's not really that noticeable, but it's just something to take into account why some shells might be older than others. You can see this one has been refitted with Vietnam War chin straps, which I'll get into. And this helmet was made by Schluter. So you can tell the difference between them because the punches in the rim are these very fine little circular punches rather than the oval punches of the McCord, as well as the heat stamp will have a sort of similar format to the McCord shells in which it'll have numbers and a letter. You can see this one says 502A, but underneath it, it will have a big capital S. So that is another way to tell if they are Schluter helmets. Now these are generally more valuable than McCord ones. Front seam fixed bail Schluters are worth a lot of money. Front seam Schluters, swivel bail ones are worth a lot, but rear seam ones don't seem to differ in price too much from McCord ones. So it's like basically just the earlier the helmet, the more it's really worth. After this, we get into Korean War helmets. From what I understand, there were two major manufacturers of helmet shells during the Korean War. One of them being McCord, so a callback from World War II. This is from now on, all the helmets manufactured will really be rear seam swivel bales. So if you look under here, you can see that the McCord kept their little oval punches on the rim. There's the swivel bale right there. And another thing you'll notice is that the bales here have metal chin strap kind of, I don't know exactly what to call them, but they help keep the chin strap attached to the bale, because one of the big problems with World War II chin straps, since they were sewn on, they'd fray off a lot of the time and just fall off. You can see that the color of the chin straps has gone to a darker greenish color, and they stay like that for pretty much forever. Another thing you'll notice is the Korean War buckles here will have green OD green paint on them. Vietnam War ones have black paint on them. That doesn't mean to say that a World War II shell could not be given a black, Vietnam War chin strap, because, I just showed you one. They're reissued helmets. They'd attach what was current at the time. And these ones, typically, I find these ones attached to Korean War made shells. I don't really see them attached to World War II ones a lot, but I'm sure they're out there. The McCord switched up their formula for heat stamps during the Korean War era. What they would do instead, man, you can't even see it in there, but I'll show you on the card. What they do is they'd write M, then typically 3 numbers and a letter. Sometimes they would have dashes in between, other times just spaces, but this one happens to be M173A. And yeah, like I said, they could either have dashes in between or just empty spaces. It really depended on the shell that you got. You'll see that on these helmets, the buckle has changed, or sorry, the hook has changed and has been given this new style hook that comes with the pressure release system, which is this little button right here, where essentially if there are a lot of pressure is applied to the helmet, such as, someone pulling up on it while it's still on your neck or something like that, it will just essentially pop free. And these little rails here, which are meant to keep the cover in place when it's on the back of the helmet. The buckle, however, stays mostly the same. You can see this one is painted OD green, just like the other side. And I have another manufacturer for Korean War helmets coming right up. This is also a Korean War helmet shell. This one was used in Vietnam, but you can see that the green buckles remains constant. And this one on the rear seam, you'll notice, kind of has 2 very faint punches on the sides. For whatever reason, when McCord switched from front seam to rear seam, they switched from 2 punches to 4 most of the times. So you'll see on the front seams, they'll have 2 oval punches right here, but on the rear seams, they'll have 2 sets of 2 on either side of the seam. This one was made by the Motor Wheel Company, which is a rather, uncommon manufacturer. The way they do heat stamps, if you can kind of see it, is you'll see MW and then a letter and the numbers. So this one's MWA58. So MW obviously stands for motor wheel, and the numbers are relatively... I forgot to mention that for Korean War onwards, the numbers don't really matter as much. During World War II, the numbers mattered because they're old, and the earlier the helmet, the more it's worth. But for Korean War and Vietnam, the number could be pretty much anything, and it would still be worth the same amount. The real changer for value is the manufacturer, so this one would probably be worth more than a more common manufacturer from the era like McCord. So this is my motor wheel one, and after this we get into Vietnam War. This is a Vietnam War shell produced by the company Ingersoll. They are the primary manufacturer for helmets during the time. They kept the rear seam and the swivel bales, but on the rear seam you can see here, Ingersoll didn't really leave any punches on the seam here. The formula for heat stamps for them, you'll kind of see here, is a 1 dash or a The first character is typically a 1 or I, followed by either a space or a dash, and then 4 numbers. So the 4 numbers here you can see is 1 space 4425. The other manufacturer for the era that I know of is Parrish, and they have heat stamps where they'll, instead of having, like an I dash, those numbers, it would say it was 4425. It would just be a very small, kind of more clearly defined font, just punched directly into the middle. Just 4 numbers typically, and no preceding characters like 1 or I. There was another manufacturer called RJ Stampings during this period, but I'm not as familiar with them, so hopefully someone else can fill in for me there. That pretty much does it for the shells. So this is moving on to the liners. Now, for the most part, the manufacturers of the liners doesn't really matter. There is one manufacturer that I'll get into for World War II after I'm done going over this World War II liner right here. So, World War II liners, for the most part, have a kind of, I believe it's covered on this one, but there's a little insignia hole right here. Apologies, I had to go and find one. But here is my World War II liner. It has a insignia hole above the front little fastener button here. This would typically be used for, like, if you were a Marine, you'd put your EGA in there or something like that. They got rid of those in later helmets, but the World War II liners had that. Other characteristics of the World War II liner would be tan or khaki webbing. So the webbing inside the helmet would be 3 kind of pieces of fabric looped around a circle, like just rope in the middle, and that was your webbing suspension. That's what you put on your head. Now liners, World War II liners are the ones with the most variation in terms of the pieces used to hold them in. So there used to be ones where instead of being shaped like a triangle, they'd be shaped like a bar, and they'd be silver, and then there were others that were a more brass or copper color. But this is a later war model. This is what you typically see. These black triangle pieces are what kind of remain constant throughout the US M1 liners. Runtime. I unfortunately don't have any examples of earlier models anymore, but these ones are kind of what you'll typically see. Now, sweatbands, this one is a later war one or a later era one, but the same rule applies, where if the fabric attached to it is kind of a khaki tan color, then that's a World War II era. Green would be what replaces it later for both Korea and Vietnam. So, the general idea, and if you are curious about the manufacturer of the helmet, I can't really get at it, but you can see the insignia, kind of, well, you can't really see it on this, I don't have a flashlight, but it's kind of punched into the top of the liner there. Now, they were made by an all number of companies: Westinghouse, Firestone, K-Pak, Mine Safety Appliances. This one happens to be made by Mine Safety Appliances, but all of them you see a decent amount. The Mine Safety Appliances symbol looks kind of like a circle with the letters, the fancy letters MSA kind of engraved in it. The K-Pak symbol looks kind of like a plus sign with the letters forming K-Pak going through each side of it. And the Westinghouse symbol looks like a W inside a circle with a smaller circle below it, which I can kind of show you. Oh, it's hard to see. You can't really see it, but you get the general idea. It's just a W inside a circle with a smaller circle beneath the W. And the other manufacturer is Firestone, which would typically just be an F inside of a shield that kind of has like a fiery, thing on top. Now, after these, moving into the Korean era. I also forgot to mention that up until the Korean War era, until the end of the Korean War era, all liners would have this leather strap here, which was meant to kind of hold the liner inside of the helmet, because these things were typically kind of loose, and if you picked up your helmet by the shell, it would fall out, and this kind of helped to prevent that. They're not really as common anymore in World War II liners, because the leather kind of would just rot away after a while and fall off, but you can still find them around. What you want to look for is something like DOT or something like that printed in the back of the buckle there, and maybe symbols put into the top of the buckle here. During World War II, these were all manner of different colors, like basically the same as the little fasteners on the inside. They could be black, they could be the little brassy, coppery color, they could be green. It depends on the era, but if you have some sort of variation that isn't black on your Korean War liner, then that means it was just a World War II one put into a a Korean War liner. On the inside, Korean War liners look a lot similar to World War II liners, except for the fact that they are green. The green webbing and stuff like that, the green on the nape strap and the sweatband. This is when you start to see dates on the sweatband. This one doesn't have one, I don't think, because it's earlier, but printed on either this side or the other side of this, you can find a DSA stamp with the date of it. Now, oftentimes, especially if the helmet has been used, it's faded to the point where you can't read it, but oftentimes it's just like, it's just a nice little addition to the helmet. Most of the time the sweatbands, if you're, especially if you're going antique shops, most of the time the sweatbands are missing, and especially the nape straps are missing, so they're nice little add-ons when you do find them. And you can see on the Korean War ones, they've gotten rid of the little hole for the insignia, and other than that, they are essentially identical. Now, these things came in a lot of different colors and stuff like that, but green was the most common. That was like the typical, that's what you'd be issued. But like the World War II one I showed you, that one was repainted for Vietnam with MP colors, so they'd be spray painted based on their use, essentially. I apologize if I have to keep going back on myself, but another thing I forgot to mention about the Korean War liners is the manufacturer will also be printed in the top right above that loop in the top of the webbing. Now, Vietnam era helmets are different. The manufacturer isn't often printed at the top, and you can see the webbing inside is essentially completely different. You can see that instead of fabric looped in the middle, there's one fabric or piece of fabric with kind of like a slot in it for the other two to run through. And the sweatbands essentially look the same, but again, you'll be able to find the dates on some of them. The date for the liner itself will be printed on either, the long side of the helmet on either side, as well as the helmet replacing or getting rid of the two little attachment points for the leather liner band and putting in these new buckles that were meant to hold the nape straps. Here's another example of a Vietnam War helmet that has the nape strap. You can see it would run through the buckles and kind of hold your neck like this right here. You can see on this one the difference in what, I'm going to use this for reference right here, but this is the difference in tone between the Vietnam War era and 80s era. You can see this one has the date on it, DLA, which means, I forgot to mention, DSA and DLA are different contractors for military equipment. DSA is kind of like your Vietnam War era, and DLA is your post-Vietnam War era. This one is DLA 88, so that means that the date of this liner band is 1988. It's got a very different kind of like darker tone to it. And I'll show you an actual 80s liner. Now, the value of M1 helmets kind of stops with Vietnam War era. After that, they aren't really worth as much. An 80s liner is worth probably half of what a Vietnam War liner is worth. Unless it's this type of liner. This type of liner is kind of different. This is an 80s liner. You can see on the inside, the darker color remains on the webbing, with a very light color on the inside of the liner. And with this one, you can kind of see sometimes the date of the liner is printed right onto the shell, I guess, of it itself, right on the sides, but some of them are printed also on the sides of the webbing. You can see the leather on the sweatband is also darker. This one is a special type of helmet, but it's another rule of thumb for helmets in general. Now, if you're looking for a helmet and it has this type of liner in it, with these two little kind of this swinging things here that attach to a chin cup, then that means it's a liner that was created for the airborne. These little snaps here are designed for attachments to helmet shell chin straps that would snap the liner in, and this was meant to just get a better hold on your chin when you were, you know, falling out of an airplane. These can be in anywhere from World War II up to Korean War, up to Vietnam, up to 80s, like this one. But they're all worth a decent bit more than regular liners. The chin cups that were used in World War II liners, and I believe Korean War ones, are these leather big cups that you don't really see very often. But the Vietnam War ones, up to the 80s ones, are very common. You'll see them all the time. This is a Vietnam War one. The 80s ones have these little brass caps on the ends here. You can see the extra attachment points outside of the helmet. I hope this video was very informative to you. I know I would have liked to have a video like this, and there probably were some out there when I first started collecting, because it took me a while to learn all this stuff, but hopefully the information I've packed into here can help you at identifying helmets. And of course, if you have any questions about a helmet you own, feel free to put it in the comments or something like that. One thing I didn't go over in this video was Euroclone helmets, which are a huge pain, especially if you're new. They are helmets that essentially European countries from like post-World War II up until like the 80s, 90s were produced, that are essentially identical to the M1 helmet, but with minor differences that set them apart, and they're worth basically next to nothing. Like a helmet liner I got in one of my helmets, if I can find it right now. I got a Euro liner in one of the helmets I purchased a long time ago, and oops, there it is. You can see how they're similar but not quite alike. Like this one has, instead of a leather band liner strap, it has a green fabric one. It has a like plasticky texture instead of the compressed paper here. And on the inside it has like very odd looking sweatband, stuff like that, nape strap that kind of buttons in on one side, and just odd looking. So they're just, you know, odd looking M1 helmets essentially, and unfortunately they're worth next to nothing. Now, I mentioned earlier I'd talk about one variant of World War II liners that was different than the others, and that is called a Holly liner, which looks like a regular liner like this, but it's very thick paper liner. They're worth a lot of money, and the reason why is because they weren't used for very long, and they also come apart very easily, so they're pretty rare. I don't unfortunately have one, but in my opinion they're kind of a waste anyways, because it's just too much money for too little. They basically would probably be around this thick, and that goes around the entire helmet with a very papery looking substance to it, and oftentimes they're frayed and beat up, but they would only be World War II liners. You can't find a Holly at least I don't think you can find a Holly re-webbed for Korea or Vietnam or anything like that. But thank you for watching, and I think I've got a couple M1 helmets that I would like to make videos on, so I'll post those at some point, and I'll see you guys in the next one.